economic growth. Thank you. And that's the key to economic growth. And so it's become kind of an obsession with me to figure out what's happening with the Vietnamese education system. And let's see if we can make this come back. Okay. Don't touch anything. So the title is a little bit provocative, and it's meant to be provocative because I want to stimulate some discussion among you. Okay. So okay, now we lost this thing again. Okay, good. All right. So here's the very big picture to begin with. We know that Vietnam is trying to achieve a very high rate of growth. Aspires to a very high rate of growth for the next generation or more. Probably unrealistically high, but we can talk about that later. What we know is that achieving anything like that growth is going to require both additional resources, especially human capital, and also the productive opportunity to apply that capital. So it's one thing to create new PhDs and new bachelor's degrees and new high school graduates, but it's another thing altogether to apply their skills in ways that are productive. And my focus is mainly on that part, not on the supply of education, but on the demand for education. And what we know over the last generation in Vietnam is that income growth has been very, very rapid. As a consequence of that, and also improvements in the school system and education policy, we have much better education attainment in Vietnam now than one generation ago. And okay, I'm sorry, there's a problem there. Much better education than one generation ago. But I'm going to argue that the demand for skilled workers has not increased at the same rate as the supply. We've got evidence that is compatible with that, that's consistent with that. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why that might be. And what I'm going to show you, I think, is that there's a combination of external forces and domestic policies and institutions which combine to create sluggish growth in demand for skills. And then I'll talk about each of those. Talk about the potential for those skills to be misapplied, that is, to be applied in ways that do not contribute to productivity growth, and then talk in the end about what kind of policy packages might be optimal to restore the balance between demand and supply. So anytime that I say something confusing or hard to understand, or if you just want to discuss, then please stop me anytime, okay? Right. So stuff that we all know already. Left-hand side is just mean years of schooling in the population of labor force age. Vietnam is the light blue. Let me get it right. Vietnam is the orange line in the left-hand graph. So what we see there from 1990 up to 2022 is that Vietnam's kind of educational attainment as measured by years of schooling has pretty much matched everybody else. Remembering, of course, that Vietnam begins in 1990 much poorer than the other Southeast Asian countries shown in that chart. So actually Vietnam's progress relative to the rest of the region has been pretty good. Right-hand side, Vietnam on the right-hand side is the kind of medium blue line. I'm sorry, is there a pointer I can use? Or I just get up and point, right? So Vietnam is this line in here, goes like that. There's a few gaps because it's World Bank data, it ends up there. And this is tertiary enrollment and it's gross, so it's all of the tertiary enrolled students as a percentage of population. And again, you can see that Vietnam, compared with other Southeast Asian countries, is doing pretty well. Not exceptional, but also not badly. That's, I think, a very good story. Again, beginning 1990, when Vietnam was one of the world's poorest countries. So this is actually pretty good achievement comparing with countries which were much richer at the beginning of this period. The other thing that I want you to notice on the right-hand side, however, is the red line. That is, of course, China. And if you look at that red line, you can see that in 1990, China's tertiary enrollment rate was, together with Vietnam, the lowest in this data set. And if you follow it to the right, you can see by 2023, it is by far the highest. And that is going to be a part of the story that I tell today. So I just want to flag that now. Okay, we know all that stuff. So Vietnam, as you all know, is aiming to achieve upper middle income status, high income status within your lifetimes. Let's hope that all works out. There are some questions about how easily that can be achieved. And if you look at recent World Bank documents, they are concerned that the growth in the skilled labor force is not fast enough to match the projected growth in demand for skilled workers needed to achieve these kinds of economic growth goals. So the World Bank says if you want a knowledge economy, you're going to need a lot more tertiary graduates than you already have. You're going to have to increase the rate at which you produce them. But at the same time, we know from lots and lots of different studies that the returns to tertiary education are going down in Vietnam. The skill premium, that is the ratio, the gross return to schooling, the ratio of tertiary educated wages to less than tertiary wages, has been falling pretty much steadily since about 2007. It rose for a while during the early Doi Mo years, and since then it's been falling, and it's been falling quite consistently for now almost a generation, almost 20 years. So that's kind of a paradox, because if there's a shortage of skilled workers, then the skill premium should reflect that, and we're not seeing that. There have been quite a few very good studies looking at the reasons why the returns to education fall, not just documenting and describing, but trying to understand them better. The benchmark study for that is one by my colleagues Hang Ban, Paul Glevy, and others. That's one that considers three sort of default explanations for low returns to schooling. That is, excess supply of graduates, low quality or declining quality of schooling, or choice of majors that are not lucrative, and they reject each of these arguments based on the data. That leaves them in their article saying, well, it must be demand side stuff. And of course, I'm happy to hear that, because I've been thinking it's demand side stuff for a long time. So the focus today is going to be on demand side influences on the incentives for Vietnamese kids to finish high school, go on to tertiary, and have a productive application of the skills that they acquire. Okay, now, first part of this talk, the first two parts actually, are going to be about things which are, broadly speaking, outside of Vietnam's control, but which I argue are important factors in understanding this problem. First of these is the tremendously rapid expansion of high-tech, skill-intensive exports from China. And the second is the preference by foreign investors in Vietnam for low value-added, low-skill occupations and activities. So let's talk a little bit about each of these. And each of these is going to summarize work from studies that I'm doing with other co-authors. You can see them listed up there. Both of these papers are now out in review, so if you have any comments and suggestions, I'd be very happy to hear those. So let's begin with China. The world has been talking about China shock for about 15 years now. Usually it's North American economists worrying about blue-collar workers and low skill-intensive industries in the United States. But China shock is global. It's not limited to any one country. And indeed, increasingly, the influence of China in Southeast Asia is playing a very important role, not just in Southeast Asia, but everywhere in the developing world. The particular focus that I want to bring to this is the following one. Since about the beginning of this century, since about 1999, China has invested very, very heavily in increasing the tertiary educated share of its labor force. You saw that diagram a couple of slides back, where the tertiary enrollment rate in China goes from just about 0 to about 75% in one generation. Okay, so that's been really huge expansion of tertiary educated workers in total and as a share of the Chinese labor force. That means that from a trade theory point of view, their capacity to produce more skill-intensive goods has risen, because they're investing in the endowment of skills required to make those industries competitive. That's one. The other thing is that since almost the same year, since 2003, China has been investing increasingly aggressively in the promotion of its skill-intensive and high-tech industries. Skill-intensive and high-tech go together, so whichever. And most recently, since 2015, we've had Made in China 2025, which is a set of very deliberate policies aiming to promote a subset of manufacturing industries including, of course, EVs, PVs, robotics, various other kinds of automation, processed chemicals, and a bunch of other things like that. Made in China 2025 has been a very aggressive program of industrial policy, subsidizing China's most highly skill-intensive industries. So you put these two things together, increasing capacity for skill-intensive production from the skilled labor side, and also increased subsidies for skill-intensive industries. And we understand why China has transformed itself in the way that we all know it has over the last 10 years or so to become the world's leading exporter, not only of all manufacturers in general, but especially of high-tech manufacturers. Not the highest high-tech, but from medium to upper medium high-tech industries. China is now the dominant exporter, as you all know, right? So that's really big. And because China's economy is very large, these enormous domestic changes in China have global implications. If we want to understand and quantify those, then we need a global general equilibrium approach. So the first of these studies does just that. We're going to use the GTAP model. It's a global general equilibrium model of trade and production and consumption. And we're going to simulate the effects of these two changes in China: increased endowment of skills, increased subsidization rate for skill-intensive industries, and look at their effects. The paper from which this is drawn looks at all countries. I'm going to focus on Vietnam. Okay, so very quickly, we use this model. We build a version of the model which has, as you can see, 32 countries, 47 production sectors, and two kinds of labor, low skill, high skill, with tertiary being the dividing line. And then we simulate the effects of the policy changes that I've just described. And because this is a model which has transport costs and other geographic impediments to trade, we see very easily that the biggest effects that China's policies have are on the countries which are closest to it. Not only geographically closest, but also closest in terms of factor endowments. Other middle-income countries, these are the ones with which China is competing directly as it upgrades its own manufacturing industries. Okay, so here's the shock that we apply. First of all, we simulate industry subsidies. We do this over a medium run period, so a 6-year period up to 2023. Our base data are 2017. So we simulate the industrial subsidy increase. There are 3 lines on this graph here. The bottom one is the red one is the subsidy rate on all of the non-targeted industries in China. That's increased modestly over this period. The top blue line is the subsidy rate on its high-tech selected sectors made in China 2025. So you can see that there's been a pretty substantial increase in the rate of subsidy, especially on the MiG-25 industries, from an average of about 4% in 2017 up to more than 7% in 2023. So that's our first item of data. The second is that based on labor force data from China, we also simulate the effect of increasing tertiary enrollments over the same period. And the data tell us that over that period, there was a almost 20% increase in the tertiary educated share of China's labor force, and accompanying that, an almost 1% decline in the non-tertiary educated share of China's labor force. So we plug these data into our model. We combine them as one experiment, as I'll show you in a moment, and then we ask, what happens to the rest of the world economy when China upgrades its capacity and its subsidies for very skill-intensive industries? Okay, here's the effect from China on the rest of the world. A little bit hard to see, but you've got the sectors, the traded sectors, not all of them, the tradable sectors listed on the left-hand side here. The red bars are world price measured on the top axis, world price changes, percentage changes, and the dots are changes in China's outputs measured on the bottom axis, also percentage changes. And the takeaway from this is pretty straightforward. If we look at the top half of the sector lists here, then you can see among these beverages and tobacco, textiles, apparel, and leather, these are standard low skill intensive, low tech industries. And we can see in each of those cases that China's exports decline a great deal and the world price rises because China is a very big trading power in every one of these categories. So this is the result of China reallocating its resources away from low-tech industries into high-tech industries. Now, if you look at the bottom part of the chart, every sector that's marked with an asterisk is one of the MiG-25, one of the targeted industries in the Chinese economy. And what we see there is pretty consistently the opposite pattern, that for almost every one of those industries, the effects of these policies, counterfactual effect of these policies, is to increase China's exports, that's the dots, and to reduce the world price as a consequence. So China increases the supply of high-tech goods into the world market, and world market demand is not growing as fast as the increase in supply, price goes down. So that's the effect of China in world markets. What does that do to other countries? These are just some of the sectors. The top three are sectors in the Made in China 2025 subset. The bottom three, as you can see, are traditional sectors not targeted by those subsidies. And this all the tiny writing down the side is all the other countries in our model. Okay? And you can see very clearly what the pattern shows. For the MiG 2025 industries, almost every country reduces its production of those sectors. For the non-targeted industries, where the world price is going up, almost every country increases its production of those industries. So, in other words, the world market is rebalancing itself in response to the change from one very big actor, which is China, transmitted through world prices. Okay, there are some additional dots in there. Remember, I showed you I'm telling you a story about the total subsidy and skill endowment effect, but we also break that down by subtotals. The red dots, if you're really curious, the red dots are just the effect of the industrial policy measures, and the green dots are just the effect of China's change in its skill endowment of labor. The total effect is those two, plus all of the other industry subsidies. So the total effect is the big story, clearly. Any questions about that? Is it clear enough? Okay.
So can I ask?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the policy of China on subsidy? There is subsidy for the industry or subsidy for even in-growth education?
Well, good question. So they certainly subsidize industry.
Okay.
Yeah. On education, I think that the really big I'm not a specialist in China, but as far as I can tell, the two things that are really big that matter are income growth overall, which increases, of course, the demand for education. Parents want their children to go to school. Yes. And then, of course, the effects of the one-child policy, which meant that every household could concentrate its resources on fewer children. And I think those are the two really big effects in play. Yeah. China has also actively promoted tertiary education. And the very big change occurs at the beginning of this time series. Until 1999, China, like several other countries, had a quota on the number of places offered by tertiary institutions. And they relaxed that quota and then abolished it over the next few years. So that is the big policy change. Made it possible for many other kids to go from high school to tertiary. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's the kind of global story. Let's now zero in on Vietnam. So here are changes in real output, that is production by each sector, and also exports just from Vietnam. Same kind of deal as before, we're just focusing on one country now. So the bars in this case are percentage changes in exports by sector from Vietnam, and the dots are percentage changes in the output of the same sectors. And this is all just cateris paribus. This is just imposing the effect of China's changes without allowing any other endogenous policy response. So think of this not as the real world, but as a component of the pressures applied to the Vietnamese economy from outside. And what we can see matches what we might expect to see, which is that the low value added industries like textiles, apparel, leather, and wood, all of those industries expand, output goes up, and exports go up. And the high value added, high skill industries, the ones that are targeted by China for extra export growth, all go down. Okay? So other things equal, the effect of China's policies through world markets onto Vietnam is to make it more difficult for Vietnam to upgrade its industry sector. upgrade in the sense of promoting more skill-intensive industries, becoming more competitive in world markets in those same industries.
May I have a question?
Yeah.
So I say the number from the model, right? Not the real number, but the assumption is from
these are simulated numbers. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. The true numbers don't look like this because this is only part of what's happened. Yeah. That's right. So basically, what's happening in China is creating headwinds for industrialization in Vietnam, especially skill-intensive industrialization. That's the takeaway from this story. Okay. Now, why do we care about that? We care about that because if you are pushing down returns to skill-intensive activities and pushing up returns to low skill-intensive activities, then that's going to have an implication in the factor market. That is, it's going to increase the demand for low-skilled labor relative to demand for high-skilled labor. So there should be a price effect associated with that. Okay. Now, if you believe, as I do, that schooling is for many households, not all, not the very richest, not the very poorest, but for all the households in the middle, schooling decisions are driven in part by economic considerations. If you believe that, then this is going to be important. Because if the unskilled wage, the blue-collar wage, is going up faster than the high-skilled wage, the skill premium, the ratio of those two, is falling. And the unskilled wage represents the opportunity cost of schooling, right? If I go to school, I'm not in the labor force, and the cost of not being in the labor force is the wage that I would get by dropping out and being a blue-collar worker, opportunity cost. At the same time, the skill premium is the gross return to additional school. So if you raise the opportunity cost of schooling and you push down the gross return to schooling, then for many households, this is going to translate into less schooling demand. And that little bit of math at the top is just Econ 101. It says that if you believe that schooling is responsive to these kinds of things, then households will choose the level of schooling for their children, which is optimal. And optimality is when the marginal cost of schooling is equal to the marginal revenue. And the marginal cost is the financial cost of schooling plus opportunity cost. And the marginal revenue is going to be reflected in the skill premium. So these things matter for the schooling decision. What do we know about the changes that are taking place? Well, trade theory, Stolper-Samuelson, tells us that if you push down the prices of skill-intensive goods relative to other goods, then you will push down the returns to factors used intensively in their production. And that's skilled labor. So that's number one. Second thing is, how big is this influence? Well, households at the top of the income distribution, they don't care about returns to schooling. It's a merit good. They just send their kids to school regardless. And households at the bottom of the income distribution, they also don't care because they're credit constrained and they have other problems that they need to address. But in the middle, and for Vietnam, the middle is probably 70% of households, then these costs and returns to schooling should matter and therefore should have an influence over the rate of enrollment, the rate of school dropout, and the rate of continuation to tertiary education. Okay. That's what I wanted to say about that, except from the model, we get some initial quantitative guesses at what's happening to those two really important prices. So the left-hand side, a little bit complicated. The red vertical line is total years of schooling in China, and all the other countries are ranged across the x-axis according to their average years of schooling. Vertical axis is change in the skill premium. You can see Vietnam, almost the same level of schooling as China, and a small decrease in the skill premium. Okay? And all of the other countries to the left and below Vietnam are other middle-income countries. So Vietnam is not unique. Lots of other countries are being affected in exactly the same way by what happens in China. And then all the countries bunched up in the top right part are either wealthy countries, which continue to dominate the most skill-intensive industries, or they are resource-rich oil exporters and mineral exporters that have a different kind of story. Right-hand diagram just maps the skill premium, that's the red dots, against the change in the skill premium, against the change in the unskilled wage. And so the bad outcome here would be lower skill premium, higher unskilled wage. That would be the two things that would push kids out of school. And if you count down from the top, about 7 countries, you get to Vietnam. Small decline in the skilled premium, big increase in the unskilled wage. So Vietnam is vulnerable to the kinds of shocks that China is transmitting into the world economy. Okay, so that's the story about external shocks from China that changes Vietnam's comparative advantage, basically, and not in a positive way when you think about the desire to upskill its manufacturing sector and create more productive opportunities for skilled workers in manufacturing. Second story is also about external preferences, but a little bit different. This is about the kind of FDI that's coming into Vietnam. Okay? So this is basically the story here is what are the preferences of foreign investors when they look around the world for a place to put their factory? Well, they find that Vietnam has abundant, very disciplined, very good, and quite cheap low-skilled labor. And almost all of the FDI into manufacturing in Vietnam continues to be of the assembly type, which exploits that kind of labor endowment. Left-hand side here just shows trends over time in real wages for low-skilled and high-skilled workers in Vietnam. Right-hand side uses those data to calculate changes in the high school premium, that's the green dots, and the college premium, that's the orange dots. And what we see on the right-hand side is that since about 2012, those two premia have both fallen. That is, low-skilled wages in Vietnam have risen faster than the wages either of high school graduates or of tertiary graduates. So the skill premium has been falling. Okay. At the same time, even though skilled workers are becoming cheaper, relatively speaking, we are not seeing responses from the manufacturing sector in upgrading its skill intensity. So here we have data from the labor force survey. The labor force survey allows us to calculate the skill intensity of each broad, in this case, one-digit industry group. Okay, so you can see public sector institutions, education, healthcare, science, etc. The numbers at the top of the bars are the tertiary educated share of their labor force, big numbers there. And then the height of the bar is the change from 2011 to 2023 in the skill intensity, the tertiary educated intensity of that sector's labor force. So we can see that all of the growth in tertiary educated intensity has been in non-manufacturing sectors. The red bar is the average for the whole labor force. Manufacturing is just to the right of that, about 5% increase in skill intensity over this period, and not very high intensity to begin with. Only 11.5% of workers in manufacturing have tertiary degrees. And if we break out the manufacturing sector on the right-hand side of this chart by ownership, domestic private firms, foreign invested firms, and household businesses, where we know that household businesses are the largest sector within manufacturing, then we see that, again, in each of these sectors or subsectors, growth has not been fast, upskilling has not been rapid. Okay? So Vietnam is producing a lot more high school graduates and even a lot more tertiary graduates, but they're not finding jobs in the manufacturing sector, which is the technologically dynamic part of the economy. They are instead going into administration and government and other kinds of services. Some of those, of course, are high tech, healthcare is very high tech, skill intensive sector, but many of them are not. And of course, buried within that, especially within other services, are a lot of entrepreneurial activities like real estate, property development, speculative activities of one kind or another that promise easy, quick returns and rents and attract a lot of skilled workers that might otherwise have gone into more productive sectors. Okay. I'm sorry, I tell pessimistic stories, don't I? So it's my job, right? I'm an economist. That's what they taught us in graduate school. Okay. What time did we start? 2:30? Just after 2:30, right? Okay.
Minutes after 2:30.
I need to speed up a little. Yeah.
You will tell me more.
Okay. Now, if you came to VEAM 2024 in Binzone, then you saw a very preliminary version of this story back then. So this is based on another paper still in process. We begin here just by looking at trends in the labor force by education on the left-hand side. Very familiar story. The number of low-skilled workers as a share has gone down. The number of upper secondary graduates has gone up, and tertiary graduates has gone up. If we look on the right-hand side, the breakdown by ownership of firms, you can see that the largest share of employment these days is in household business sector. That's almost 40% of total employment. You can also see at the bottom the dotted green line. That's the FDI sector. It's doubled in size. So actually, proportionally, that's been the fastest growing employment sector within Vietnam over this period, 2011 up to 2023. And now they employ about 10% of Vietnam's labor force. Okay, so that's been a big deal. But if we look at these numbers, we break them down by the skill, or rather the educational attainment of the labor force. We see something, what we see is almost nothing. That's the important thing. Way to read these. The black line is the average for the entire labor force. So top left diagram, the lowest group of workers by educational attainment, you can see that their share in the labor force has gone down from about 75% down to a little over 60% over this period. And you can see the lines for the other two as well, black line, okay? And if we ignore the blue line for government for a moment, then what we see for all of the others is that their trends in terms of the share of labor force made up of low-skilled workers, medium-skilled workers, or high-skilled workers basically just tracks along with the overall labor force. Other than government, there is no sector in Vietnam which is dramatically increasing or reducing the share of skilled workers, or low-skilled workers for that matter, in its labor force relative to the total labor force. They're all just employing the same kind of proportions relative to the total labor force that they always did. Government's the only exception where you can see that government has really greatly expanded the tertiary share of its labor force. That's the only big change that occurs here. And if you look at the FDI industries, that's the green dotted line again. They've increased somewhat the secondary educated share of their labor force, along with the growth of that in the total labor force. When it comes to tertiary educated workers, green dotted line, compare with the black line, they're only tracking along with the overall growth of tertiary educated workers. So looking to the FDI sector to provide a big boost in employment for tertiary educated workers looks like not happening. Okay? That's direct FDI jobs, but that's not the total effect of FDI in Vietnam. The total effect is all the FDI jobs created directly, plus all of the other jobs created indirectly when you build an industrial park and stock it with factories and workers. Okay, all of the motorcycle taxi drivers and food providers and accommodation providers and blah 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 blah. Okay, so we're interested in that. So in this paper, we estimate local employment multipliers from FDI just to see, well, what is the net skill impact, the net labor demand and skill demand impact of this change in FDI. Okay, so what do we find out? Let me jump quickly to these results. Here we use the same data set, labor force survey, and from 2011 to 2023, we look at a variety of outcome variables that I'll show you in a moment, and we regress those on a bunch of fixed effects, which I'll also show you in a moment, and then on a measure of these are district level data, a measure of the district level employment of workers in foreign invested companies. Okay, and the question is, does an increase in the foreign invested, well, what effect does an increase in the foreign invested labor force at the district level have on employment for other kinds of workers, other kinds of industries, other levels of education in the same district or in neighboring districts? So we estimate all of that. And here's the kind of top level result, and you would have seen this in VIM last year. The number here is the endogenous variable is non-FDI employment in the district over this period of time. And the critical variable, the first one, is FDI employment in the district. So these numbers say that there's almost 1-for-1 job addition. Every time you add another worker in a foreign invested factory, you add one more worker outside the factory in some other activity, some other firm. Okay, just about 1 for 1. So, and that's very robust with respect to different choices of fixed effects, as you can see here. In the first 3 columns, because we're not controlling for district fixed effects, we use district characteristics instead. So we control for as many of those as we can. And in the last one, we just throw those out and we put in a district fixed effect. But the results are essentially the same all the way across. And they're very robust. And if we break this down, I'm going to break it down 3 ways. First of all, by sector, second, by ownership of the firm, and then third, the most important, by education. The results are going to be very predictable. By sector, now, this is a compressed table. Each line, A, B, C, is the outcome of a different regression estimate, okay? And I've just stacked them all together because in each column, we're using the same set of fixed effects and the same set of observations, so we don't need to report each regression separately, okay? So look at row 1, agriculture. Doesn't matter which set of fixed effects we use, we get a pretty much null effect, okay? So add more FDI workers, it slightly reduces maybe the number of agricultural workers in the district. Second row, manufacturing, we get about a 1/3 spillover from FDI employment to local manufacturing industries. And a look at the third row, we find about a 2/3 spillover from FDI employment to local service sector activities. So most of the new job creation, 2/3, is going into service sector activities. So not a lot of evidence, not very strong evidence for kind of upstream linkage type effects on manufacturing. Some, but not a whole lot. Okay, most of the new activity is in services. What kind of firms are adding workers when we add FDI workers? Well, agricultural households, no. Non-agricultural household firms, yes, very much. And private firms, yes, very much. So for each additional FDI worker, we're getting about another 0.5, roughly speaking, workers in basically micro enterprises, household level firms providing, let's say, restaurant services or whatever, and about another 0.4 workers in private firms doing a whole variety of things, including stuff like construction and Gojek drivers, whatever. Okay, a little bit of an increase in government as well. So most of the spillover from FDI is going into service sectors. Most of the spillover is going roughly equally into really micro enterprises, most of which are informal, and then into private sector firms.
The impact on other FDI companies.
Don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, don't know. So the assumption behind these estimates is that the increase in FDI workers is exogenous, right? So that foreign investors are not considering the characteristics of the local labor force when they make their investment decision. They're looking at whether it's close to a port or has reliable power supply or suitable incentives or whatever. Yeah, so we're done.
And the government framework here include the SOEs.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay, now last and maybe most important, same breakdown, and this time the breakdown is by level of education. So what we find is we add one more FDI worker and we get about 0.6 to 0.7 new workers of very low skill, right? Less than complete tertiary education. And then a little bit of a gain for those with upper secondary education. And if you look at those numbers, so take column 3 or column 4, you've got like 0.7, 0.2, 0.1-ish, like that. Then these are just about exactly matching the existing breakdown of the labor force by those same levels of education. In other words, we're at best replicating the existing skills structure of the labor force when we create new labor demand by putting in foreign invested factories and creating an ecosystem of new jobs around those factories. So to look to FDI as a mechanism for increasing skills demand in Vietnam, at least as far as local labor market effects are concerned, is a non-starter. It's not happening. That's because of the preferences of foreign investors. Now that, of course, is something that could be affected by policy, so we could come back to that at the end. Any questions about this part?
So,
yes.
sorry, losing freelance, do you consider as in terms of FDI employment on the government number of government employees, but actually that is a genuine change because the government number of government employees increased over time.
Yeah.
But in recent years, the number of government employees reduced. So I don't know whether if you include the recent survey, the result will be changed.
Yeah. Okay. So the way that we control for that is through the fixed effects that we put into these models.
Yeah.
And in particular, if you look at column 3, in column 3 we have a province times year fixed effect, which means that everything that's happening in that province, in the province in which the district is, everything that's happening in that province year by year, which is not explained by FDI employment, is getting picked up in there. So if there are changes in the number of government workers or the composition of government workers that are not associated with FDI, then hopefully that fixed effect is picking it up in there. So we're not confounding our estimates with that story. Yeah. Yeah.
So I really like this way of explaining things because I've been troubling with the paradox of decreasing return to education for years now. But the thing is, so allow me to summarize your thesis until now.
Yeah.
Is that you're saying that the China is shifting its focus industrially, and some part of the low-level manufacturing is outsourced, let's say, to other lower tier countries. Let's say that.
Yeah.
And we are picking up picking that up.
Mm.
But then naturally we would not think that the return to education in China would decrease. But that happens as well.
It does.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
And that is, it's so mind-boggling to me. So since around 2010, 2015, return to education decreased.
Yeah.
So I try to go to another type of theory to try and find an explanation for this. And one thing I come across is the signaling function of education. So what do you think about that? So let's say that education become more of a signal rather than the vocabulary enhancing function.
Yeah.
So,
okay. I think both are true. That it's not either or, right?
Yeah.
So China has made huge investments in its tertiary educated labor force, and it's worth noting that the proportion of tertiary enrollments in China in STEM majors is much higher than almost every other country in the world.
Yeah.
So this is not just kids studying literature or something like that. They are job oriented. Right? I think that's an important consideration. But then the other part is, it's signaling one-child families in an upper middle income setting are going to send their kids to tertiary education no matter what, right? And it's not a choice. It's about, okay, we have the resources and we aspire for you to have a tertiary degree, so you go and study and don't think about the returns, which of course is part of the reason why we have such a high tertiary enrollment rate in China, and also very high rate of tertiary unemployment.
Yeah.
Of course, kids of moderately wealthy households can afford to be unemployed, right? To be picky about what job they take. And so a lot of that is voluntary unemployment. Right? And at the same time, there's a great paper by Eric Hanachek came out about a year ago, which shows that the skill premium in China fell over the period from about 2015 to 2022, I think, maybe earlier than that, over about a decade period, by 20 percentage points. Huge. Right? Yeah. So even in spite of all of that, it's happening.
So over that same kind of trend of reducing return to education, you're saying that the China is facing a different problem than Vietnam. So they're facing the problem of excess supply, but we're facing a problem of the decreasing demand to high skill education.
Yeah. I think that one way to think about this is if you take a long historical perspective. When China first entered the world market back in at the end of the 1980s, basically, then China's labor force was almost 100% blue collar workers, right? And it had an enormous effect on blue collar wages in the global labor force. It pushed down the price of blue collar labor everywhere. That led to things like Donald Trump. But now China is a skill abundant country. And so now the effect has flipped around. And now China invests in skilled workers, and that pushes down the return to skilled workers everywhere in the world. And it does so through changes in the prices of skill intensive products that China exports. Yeah. That's the global general equilibrium story. Okay. I'm going to run out of time. I better move on, right? So those are two big external or quasi-external forces, and each of them has a policy response, potential policy response from Vietnam. But I just want to put them out there and say these are pressures operating on the Vietnamese economy, which help us to understand at least part of the story of lackluster growth in skilled labor demand. Okay, so then third part is based on some work that I did for a briefing for the CCPS, Central Committee on Policy and Strategy. Late last year at the invitation of the UNDP. So this is not quantitative work. This is more like synthesizing. But it begins with this question: what happens to all these tertiary graduates as they come out of school in Vietnam? So this takes data for 2023, and it looks just at 25-year-olds. So still kids, who are recently entering the labor market. So we're looking at that because we're looking at sort of, okay, what's the margin at which labor market choices are being made? Not the entire employed labor force, but relatively new entrants. Where do they go? All right, left-hand side, you can see the education that they come in with. Middle, you can see what kind of broad sector they join. The right-hand side, kind of occupation that they end up with. And there's lots to think about here, but one thing to think about is that when you look at, if you follow the line through manufacturing, not agriculture, but manufacturing up here, we can see that manufacturing remains dominated by low and medium skilled workers. Very small fraction of tertiary educated workers go into manufacturing. And if you follow that red line out to the right, you can see that the majority of the workers who go into manufacturing with tertiary degrees end up being either in the service component or in the managerial component of that. They're not getting into technical occupations. And that's because manufacturing is not demanding high-skilled technical workers, right? That's the number one story I want you to take away, but you can stare at this for a long time and get other stories out of it. Running out of time, so I won't do that. So that's number one. Choices made by workers. Well, very few tertiary educated workers go into manufacturing, and of those that do, very, very few go into technical occupations where a STEM degree might be something which contributes directly to productivity growth. Okay, where do the other workers go? Well, let me finish this story. Most of the tertiary workers, most of the tertiary graduates end up in service sector jobs. And you know a lot of these people already. They're entrepreneurs of many kinds, right? But being an entrepreneur in Vietnam, for many purposes at least, means not really using your tertiary education, but using other attributes that you bring with you, your connections, your intelligence, your cognitive ability, your entrepreneurial flair. And those are the things that help you to make money. Having a STEM degree may or may not be useful for most purposes, right? So there's a lot of diversion of tertiary graduates into money-making opportunities that are not directly contributing to productivity growth. Okay, where do the rest of them go? Well, a really large fraction of them go to Japan. And Japan is the purple band in this graph here. The stock of Vietnamese citizens of working age in Japan is now about 600,000. That is 1% of the Vietnamese labor force. And they are disproportionately tertiary educated. So the stock of tertiary educated workers from Vietnam in Japan is much higher than its share in the Vietnamese labor force. So Vietnam is leaking tertiary educated workers to opportunities that are perceived as better outside of Vietnam. This is the outside option for a tertiary educated person who has the resources to make this kind of choice. And you all know people like this too. So where tertiary educated work is going, they're not going into manufacturing, they're going into services in Vietnam, or they're leaving the country altogether. Okay, so what to do about all of this? Right? If you want to be a high income country by 2045, you're going to have to find a way to get all of those people back into productive occupations, putting them together with productive resources like capital and technology, and giving them jobs that they feel are rewarding enough to give up what they're currently doing, come back from Japan or Taiwan, or move out of real estate development into some other more technically oriented sector. That's the challenge that Vietnam faces for its labor force. Okay, how do you do it? Well, you have to offer them not only a decent income, of course, and opportunities for advancement. Vietnam is pretty good at low cost living, so that part is at least taken care of. And that means, in a way, Vietnam has an advantage because you can pay quite low nominal wages to tertiary graduates and still have them feel that that's an attractive income because the cost of living is very low. So you can convince people to go live in Bin Dung, for example, and give them nice housing and good amenities and all the rest of it, and they'll be very happy there, even though by international standards their salary is not very high. Oh, are you finished with this seminar, Lin?
Sorry.
Am I done? Any questions? Let me keep talking in the meantime. So if you can offer a decent living and a reasonably good ladder for advancement, then you can attract a lot of workers. If you can also offer them amenities and freedoms and other things that tertiary educated people want, then you can also make being in Vietnam more attractive as well. You know, and I think about all the Vietnamese, tertiary educated Vietnamese working in Japan. They're choosing not necessarily a very high salary, but a bundle of things, which includes salary, but also other attributes and amenities that Japan can offer that they feel are not matched by conditions in Vietnam. So it's kind of a broad social problem, not just a kind of a technical problem of finding jobs. Okay. So let me begin to wrap up here. Is it?
Yeah.
Will it restart?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the? Did we?
The online should be okay.
Oh, they'll be
should
okay.
right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's make sure we get our screen back again.
Yeah, you need to share it.
Need to reshare the screen? Oh no, we're okay.
For
Yeah.
online.
Oh, for online. Oh, okay. Share again. And go to here and share. And then yeah, there we are. Okay, so that should be all right. Okay, good. So let me come to the last part of this talk. It's already gone rather long. I'm sorry. So this is thinking in a more positive way about what possibilities exist to change things in Vietnam, and in particular to improve demand for high-skilled or potentially high-skilled workers in Vietnam. Okay, it's going to depend on manufacturing because manufacturing is the technologically dynamic sector. So it's going to be all about manufacturing until such time as Vietnam can be competitive in skill-intensive services, but that's a long way away just yet. Manufacturing matters because it's got technological complementarity between skills and capital. If you can attract capital investment, it's going to come along with demand for skilled workers, raise the demand for skilled workers. Manufacturing, of course, has lots of potential for productivity growth. That's also good for the economy as a whole, and it confers externalities. When firms succeed in manufacturing, other firms notice, and they imitate or they get ideas from those, and that makes them more productive as well. These are all very important characteristics of manufacturing, which are shared to a lesser extent by other sectors. And then finally, the market for manufacturers is global in scale. So if you can succeed, if you can occupy a niche within the global value chain, then there's pretty much no limit to how much your industry can grow. That's a lesson we can learn from China, where in the early years of China's industrialization, you had entire cities making one product, socks, right? Shoes, things like that, simple products like that, but entire cities where every firm was acquiring, borrowing, stealing ideas from every other firm and becoming more productive as a consequence. So there's a lot of potential for positive technology and productivity spillovers, and a lot of potential to exploit economies of scale if you can occupy a niche within the world market. Okay, so that. However, domestic value added in Vietnam's exports has not shown any changing trend for a very long time. This is 2014 to 2023. The top two bars, the light blue and the sort of medium blue, components of domestic value added. We're looking for trends here, increases in domestic value added, not seen. Okay, so then how do we go about thinking about what's needed? I want to spend just a couple of slides talking about the two economists who won the Nobel Prize this year, Aghion and Howitt. Their model of economic growth is one that we should all be studying more closely. Basically, they say that growth is driven by productivity gains that come from innovation, and and those gains are possible when the economic environment is flexible enough that a firm which is innovating can capture resources from less innovative firms. They call that creative destruction. So your firm is old and uses outdated technology, and you employ a lot of engineers, and my firm is young and uses newer vintages of capital and technology. I'm going to hire away your best engineers, and I'm going to grow, and your firm is going to shrink, and that's creative destruction. That's kind of the driver of growth in the Aghion Howitt story. And in the real world, we see this happen all of the time. What are the three things in the Aghion Howitt model that are necessary for this? First of all, you've got to produce skilled workers, so you need an education system that works. Second, you've got to have financing for startups and for young firms that want to experiment, want to take risks, all the rest of it. So they're going to be generally small firms, at least initially, and they need to be able to access financial capital at competitive rates. Third thing, you've got to have a competition environment, a policy, which allows those firms to flourish and doesn't allow them to be choked and crushed or discouraged by existing large, powerful, well-connected incumbent firms. Okay? So these are the generic conditions for success in the Aghion Howitt model. How does Vietnam do on these? Very quickly. Good education system, financial system. What would you give it? A B? Maybe a C? It's doing better, but it's got a long way to go. And if you're a small or a micro enterprise in Vietnam, it's really hard to get a bank loan at a competitive rate, right? So it's very hard for new firms, especially, of course, given that many of them are initially informal, to get capital. So that's a problem. Third thing, competition policy. There have been some very big steps towards a more level playing field in Vietnam. Last year's Politburo Resolution 67, I guess, kind of prioritized the growth of the private sector. That's very aspirational language in that resolution, but it's pointing in the right direction. So I would say still homework to be done there to allow new entrants to get into the market and allow them to flourish and not be choked out by, for example, SOEs or other well-connected, powerful, large corporations. So getting there. But the other thing is, beyond the Aghion Howitt model, we've got two other things that matter. One is Vietnam's still a middle-income country, so its capacity for R&D, that kind of innovation, very, very low. Second thing, Vietnam is very closely connected into global marketing value chains, and that's something else that's not in the Aghion Howitt model. So here are two kind of ideas about that. On the first one, we have to rethink the idea of innovation. if you think of innovation only as people in laboratories producing new discoveries, that's going to be infeasible for Vietnam for a very long time. Okay? But if you think of innovation as finding niches within the global market where a company can be profitable, then Vietnam has much better opportunity. And China has showed the way on that, like socks produced by entire cities, that kind of thing. So innovation can be on a marketing level, not just on an R&D and discovery level. I think that's kind of a change in mindset that's very important to think about. Second thing, because Vietnam is so closely connected to global manufacturing value chains, then the other opportunity is through this process that Rod called called cost discovery, which is basically allowing firms to experiment. Can we be a profitable producer of some product? Well, let's give it a try, see what happens. And if they succeed, if they fail, of course, they go out of business. If they succeed, then all of their neighbors, other firms like them, see that and they can imitate. And so there's lots of potential for spillovers as well. So Vietnam can be an innovator in global markets, but not by burying people into labs trying to produce a new discovery in biotech or something like that, but by thinking about what's their position in the world market and within global value chains, and how can they occupy profitable niches within those global value chains. Those things, I think, offer a lot of potential. Okay, so what's needed? Bottom line, complementarities. Within firm capital skills, complementarities, of course, economy-wide education, financing, competition policy, and trade and FDI policies, which encourage and facilitate firms to discover what they are good at within the world market and to exploit those kinds of opportunities. And also, of course, policies that allow Vietnamese firms to be cushioned somewhat from macro shocks coming from the world economy, crazy people imposing tariffs, for example, right? And those things are very important responsibilities of the Vietnamese government, because it alone can help to create an environment in which firms are not pushed around and maybe buried by those kinds of concerns. And then finally, on the worker front, you've got to think about not just creating jobs and hoping that people come to fill them, but creating an entire ecosystem within which skilled workers who are internationally very mobile will feel that they have an opportunity to not just to do well, but to flourish, to have good amenities for their children, to have the kinds of social and political and economic freedoms that they might enjoy in another setting. And I think that that's, again, kind of a neglected area of economic policy. Okay, skip that. Last slide. So what does Vietnam need to achieve much faster overall economic growth? Productivity gains, of course. How's it going to get that? It's going to have to be an active participant in global value chains. It's going to have to also upgrade the skill intensity of its manufacturing. So China is pushing in the wrong direction. That doesn't mean that Vietnam cannot find and exploit opportunities. It's just going to be more costly to do so relative to China's effect. Okay, and then bottom line of all of that is that if you want to create a knowledge-based economy, it's not enough just to create new opportunities for education. You've got to create productive applications for educated workers. And that, I think, is where policy can really innovate within the Vietnamese setting. But it takes a slightly different mindset. Education policy is not just about pushing kids into school. It's about creating jobs and environments that say to them, if you go to school, you'll have a better life in the future. So that's what I had to say today. Thank you very much. And
Thank you very much.
Go ahead. I went way over time.
Right, thank you. Any questions from the audience?
So, sorry, can I ask you, because actually you are talking about two stories. I just like the first story about the impact of the subsidy policy of China on Vietnam, and the second, my FDI implementation on Vietnam. But
Yeah.
Actually, do you have any connection between the FDI and the
Yes.
China policy?
Yeah.
Discussion?
Yeah, there are, I mean, not direct connections, but they are both reflections of international conditions
Yeah.
that affect the Vietnamese economy. So the China part of the story just says that if the prices for skill-intensive products are going down, then firms will find it less profitable to engage in that activity.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole story about China applies not only to Vietnam but to every country that is producing in the same sphere. The FDI part just says that whether Vietnam likes it or not, what foreign investors see when they look at Vietnam is low-skilled workers with low wages, and so the kinds of FDI enterprises that might be much more skill intensive and much more innovation driven are not yet coming to Vietnam. So that's again like a reflection of how the rest of the world impacts the Vietnamese economy. That's the general connection between the two. Of course, there is one other connection, and that is that a great deal of new FDI in Vietnam now comes from China.
Really?
Yes, a lot. Yeah, and so what's happening there is that the lowest skill intensive, low tech activities in China are becoming less and less competitive. And Chinese firms are looking for other countries where they can be competitive in those industries, just as the Japanese did back in the 1980s after the Plaza Accord made their labor-intensive industries uncompetitive. Then they went looking for the rest of the world. Where can we put our assembly-type industries? They found Thailand, Malaysia, places like that. And then now China is finding countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, and elsewhere for those same countries as an outlet for those industries. So they are connected.
In your presentation, in your presentation, you said that Vietnamese SMEs or firms are always in terms of traditional innovation and the innovation. You are advising us to more like marketing innovation, things like that. But recently, the government is kind of making a lot of bets on digital transformation,
Right.
AI, that kind of things.
Yeah.
So how that, how you reconcile all that? Because on one hand, the digital transformation will be like very much disrupt the whole production function in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we are to take that opportunity and you are still innovating some way, marketing innovation, I think what's your take on it?
Yeah. So it should not be an either or, right? I mean, no firm can be competitive in the world market now without digitalizing. So clearly that's an essential component, and prioritizing that really important. So maybe think about it this way.
But this on its own is not enough, right? But digital transformation on its own is not enough.
Well, if you just push digitalization without, I mean, it sounds stupid to say this, I guess. If you say digitalization is the end, the goal, right?
Yeah.
Then you're kind of pointing in the wrong direction, because the goal is a competitive, profitable industry, and digitalization is a component of that. So that what you really want is more productive industries, and in order to make them more productive, they need a bunch of things, including new technologies.
Because as it stands at the moment, a lot of the local government putting up like the target for digitalized economy up to 40%. So
Yeah.
What's the loss to that?
You're asking me?
Yeah. Why 40%?
You should ask the person who made the target. I don't know. I mean, I've been around Vietnam long enough to know that there's often a big gap between the aspiration of policy and the execution. So that the aspiration, and you take digitalization, right? Everybody recognizes that becoming a fluent part of the digital economy is an essential ingredient for success. That goes without saying. So Vietnamese policy pushes digitalization, and that's great, right? But then the execution is often flawed in this way, that the execution doesn't always, to me at least, seem to have a very clear concept of how to implement the idea. And you end up with R&D funds being distributed to provinces and provinces going like, well, we don't know what to do with this. Let's give it to communes and right.
Let's have a party.
let's buy a big screen TV to have our digitalization seminars on, right? So I mean, I think again, the acquisition of new technology should be in service of the broader goal, which is productivity growth. And so you can't create productivity growth just by pushing digitalization. It's got to be part of something big. Sounds vague.
Any questions online? Go ahead.
There's one offline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I listened your lecture online, but there's many disruption while driving, so I may not get your presentation very clear. So it seems like you start on the demand side to answer why I'm not really successful right now for upskilling, upskill the skill. So it seems like the answer is because the firm coming to Vietnam and then they don't require that demand of labor.
Yeah.
So that is why we don't have the demand push for the upskilling. Is that correct?
Yeah, broadly. Yeah. We didn't talk about policies in response to that, but yeah.
Yeah. But how about how do I say, from the supply side, like the education system, when they, of course, we have many autonomous university try to sell the educational program that a great student come in and then increase the amount of student and we also have the mismatch issue in the labor market. So in one sense, we have already upscaled the skill of many students and young liberal. On the other side, their talent or capacity, even though it's upskilled, are not used by the
not demanded.
firm. Yes.
Yeah.
So is there, because when I look at some like take home message and also some implication there, I have not seen clear some kind of policy or implication to manage the issue, the mismatch issue and the demand issue.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the second to last bullet point here, this is the extent of my thinking about it, and that is that if you can find a mix of policies that incentivize firms to upskill labor demand, that is, give them access to capital and technology, including digital technologies, then they're going to want to hire more skilled workers to manage all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
These are complements. So if you create the environment within which firms want to upskill in that way, then you will increase the demand for skilled workers, and that increase in demand will, I think, what I say here is that the skill supply will take care of itself. That is, if firms are saying we need more engineers, we need more IT specialists, we need more biochemists or whatever it is, then that signal goes through the labor market, through the tertiary education market, and after a lag produces more people of that kind.
I see.
So the skills, I mean, there's always going to be some amount of skills mismatch. Right?
Oh yeah. So in that way, something like career orientation may play important role in upskill. Like for example, when the student is at high school, right, we do better job in orienting them to learn more engineering and on coding rather than learn economics and other stuff like
useless
accounting
subjects.
and something, right? And then after they graduate, they may not find a good job that match with the demand from the area firm and other firms.
Yeah. The question implied there is one that should be answered by someone who is really an education specialist, and I'm not.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
So what I know about education, at least in America, is that having a tertiary degree is really, really important for your career prospects, and it doesn't matter what the degree is in.
Yeah.
Right. So there are firms in my town in America, one very, very big electronic medical records firm. It recruits about 1,500 new tertiary graduates every year, right? Has a huge labor force. and the firm takes the explicit attitude. They say, we don't care what your degree was, if it was moral philosophy or history or economics or anything else, we don't care, because we'll train you with the skills that you need to work for us. What we need to know is you're smart enough to go to university and get a degree and stick it out, and those are the attributes that we're looking for. So I'm not sure, I mean, obviously STEM disciplines are STEM disciplines, that's different. But I'm not really sure that mismatch is a supply side problem. I think that if firms demand skilled workers and they can't get exactly the right person that they want, then they'll figure out strategies to recruit others and hire and train them in that way. Too optimistic.
Any other questions from the audience online? No?
Yeah.
Okay. So may I wrap up? Go ahead. Well,
If there's one question, you can see it in
Uh,
the chat.
Okay, I need to unshare, right?
Yes.
And go to Zoom.
No.
Nope.
Oh, you need to go back to the.
Uh-oh. Stop sharing. Okay, here.
The chat, yes.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
one.
yeah. Okay, hi, thanks for this one.
okay, yeah.
Hmm.
Hello, David.
That's from window.
So Quindo, if you're online, do you want to just unmute and throw your question out? I'm not seeing a question here. Education researchers suspect there's a gap in quality of education.
So I think her question is similar to my question to you. She talked about the course or the post-secondary education and tertiary education, BET and so on. We are curious about this gap, not just between what we do in basic and tertiary education, but also between what we do and
What other systems
do.
What's meant by other systems here?
Yeah.
Does anyone know? I'm not sure I can easily respond to this. I don't fully understand the question or the comment.
So in short, I would like to have a question for you.
Yeah.
I think that the implication from the first half of the presentation should talk about the development model that Vietnam has been following over the past 30 years. The current context is like reset, right?
Reset?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reset is already determined.
Yeah.
Actually, Vietnam is endowed naturally with China. We are the neighbor of China, and we have shared some of the similarities in the political ideology. And for the development strategy, we also follow China. Export that growth.
Yeah.
So China stand already stood there as a big brother, and they consume and they let's say attract most of the resources needed to follow our project.
Yeah. Yeah.
So far, we can say that Vietnam has achieved some kind of limited success in terms of following that export strategy. But given the shock that we just observed from the Donald Trump tariff on Vietnam, we see that we have no other way to continue to follow up. Right. So pointing out that that the current economic development model and current economic structures in terms of labor skills or in terms of the sectoral structure. I think it's good, right? But the fix is not easy.
I agree. um, let me say two things about Vietnam versus China, relative to China. The history is correct. Vietnam has learned a great deal from China and also from the other successful ASEAN countries. I would add to that. Two characteristics of China that have caused great divergence. First of all, China is really, really big, and with its size, it can capture huge economies of scale up and down its supply chain, and we see that now with industries at the top of the supply chain, basic metals, robotics, things like that, conferring very big cost advantages even to traditional sectors like apparel downstream by reducing their cost of production. But those economies of scale require an economy the size of China to work. So that's, I think, one really big difference with Vietnam. The other is that China has subsidized its manufacturing industries to an extent that I don't think any other country can afford. We don't know exactly what the number is, but most estimates are around 4.5% of GDP devoted to subsidizing China's industries, which is why Chinese cars are really cheap everywhere now, right? So basically, I think Vietnam has to ask itself, if you want to have that kind of domestic manufacturing supply chain, then the policies required to emulate China are going to be extremely costly, especially for a small economy like this. So I would say that the experience of China was a valuable thing for Vietnam in the early industrialization years, but that they are now diverging in ways that are fundamental different.
So I believe from the household's perspective, we cannot just by ourselves, which future is really going to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is part of what they're doing. And, I don't think Vietnam has anything to learn from China about investing in education. Because when I look at Vietnam, everyone in Vietnam is very focused on education. I mean, everyone I meet in Vietnam is either in education or heading into education or is saving for their children's education. I mean, it's really a universal characteristic.
And the return is declining.
In spite of the return.
Very rational. The rational behavior.
So the simple question is that who would guide the parents to invest on their children's education? The government policy or direction, or their own perspective of the example of the successful people?
So let me answer that with a question of my own. Okay, if you're a parent with children in sort of early teen years now, and you're thinking about the future for your child, okay, then you might be walking around with a model of your child's career choices that looks something like this. Okay, the kid can turn 15 and they can drop out of school and get a blue collar job right now, or they can stay in school and go to tertiary maybe, and end up either working in one or another sector within the Vietnamese economy or migrating to Japan or Taiwan, which is a very large fraction of an increasingly large fraction of tertiary educated Vietnamese now do. So the model has these possible paths. Now, with those paths in mind, no sensible parent is going to say, yeah, just drop out at 15 and get a blue collar job. Stay in education. But then the question is, where are your kid going to go? And I don't see anything terribly wrong with a lot of tertiary educated Vietnamese or tertiary education seeking Vietnamese going to Japan or Taiwan, either as workers or as students. I think it's just great. It helps the labor market clear here, for one thing, and then they acquire skills and knowledge and connections and things like that, which if they do come back will be enormously useful, potentially very useful to them. So I think, any smart parent with the means to send their child to tertiary education would do so and would rationally do so, even if they don't see a kind of a complete set of opportunities within the Vietnamese economy right now. Because I think you take the long view, a career is 40 years or something like that. If you go and spend 5 years in Japan and come back, well, it's still fine. Yeah.
When you mentioned about the China story about the upskilling, they succeed in upskills their labor, right? And do you think that's one of the key reasons is that because the domestic firm in China, they are very innovative and then they can utilize the tertiary student.
Yeah.
That may not happen right now in Vietnam. Is that
That's right.
the difference?
Yeah, I skipped over the industrial policy slide, but your question is about that.
Yeah.
So you look at China and, there's a mix of things going on there. From the supply side, lots and lots of new STEM graduates coming into the labor market.
Yeah.
From the demand side, very big subsidies and incentives for industries that will employ STEM graduates. Okay, so there's lots of mismatch in that market, but there's also a lot of productive application of tertiary education going on. Right? Now, from the demand side, the key to that is this 4% or so of GDP that China is devoting to industrial subsidies. I don't think that's feasible for Vietnam. I don't think that model works for Vietnam. So they've got to find out another way to promote demand for skills other than just handing over tons of money to Vingroup or somebody like that and saying, do good things. Right? So they're going to have to be more creative than that. Yeah. It's an opportunity, in a way.
Yeah, but it's also a very long-term issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But of course it is. Yeah. Yeah. I've been coming to Vietnam. I'm almost embarrassed to say for 46 years.
Wow.
So longer than any of you guys have been alive, except maybe this guy.
Yeah.
Seen a lot of changes, but one constant in all of that is that Vietnamese people are incredibly focused on education and improving their capabilities all the time. With any resources that they have, this is how they spend it. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so the long run prospects are very good. But how do you get there?
Thank you very much for spending time with us. I learned a lot.
Thank you for inviting me.
Your presentation. I hope then, actually, the last part on Philip, the annual and it is very interesting. And it's kind of motivational for us.
Yeah, we can. I can talk more about it, but we don't have time.
All right. So maybe another time.
Yeah.
I promise that I will invite you in to be kind of ISV membership. All right. Thank you very much. So I think we will end our discussion here today.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. If you have other questions, let me know.